The parking lot of Maple Creek Elementary buzzed with the sound of rolling suitcases, car doors slamming, and excited chatter from parents guiding their kids through the early evening heat. The Houston sky was dimming into a hazy pink, cicadas buzzing in the trees above as families made their way inside for school night. Inside room 104, Miss Lillian Reyes stood behind her desk, arranging stacks of welcome packets and student progress charts with meticulous care. She wore a navy blue blouse ironed to perfection and a warm but slightly nervous smile. The classroom was spotless, walls decorated with hand-drawn maps, book quotes in colorful lettering, and a bulletin board titled "Our Year to Shine." But the chairs meant for parents remained mostly empty. One by one they trickled in, but not into the front rows. Parents stood by the door, murmuring to each other. A few took seats in the back, arms crossed, eyes darting around the room. No one approached her. Some glanced at the handouts and put them down. One father gave a polite nod but looked away immediately. Lillian took a quiet breath. "Good evening, everyone. I'm Miss Reyes, and I'm really excited to share what our 5th graders will be working on this year." No one responded. A woman in a designer blazer leaned over to whisper to another parent. "Is she even certified? I've never heard of her." "She's not even from around here," someone else muttered. Lillian heard them, but kept her face composed. She pointed to a projected slide outlining the curriculum, trying to continue with enthusiasm. "We're focusing on building strong writing skills, critical thinking, and—" "Excuse me," a man raised his hand. "Will there be a new teacher assigned later this semester? We were told Mrs. Tran was on maternity leave." "Is this permanent?" There was no hostility in his tone, but no warmth either. Lillian paused for just a beat. "Yes, I've joined the team this year, full-time." The silence that followed was sharp. The principal, Mr. Gilmore, appeared in the doorway. Broad-shouldered, with streaks of gray in his hair, he surveyed the room and immediately sensed the tension. He nodded at Lillian, then addressed the group. "I see many of you haven't had the pleasure of meeting Miss Reyes yet. I wanted to personally welcome her tonight." He stepped fully into the room. "Some of you may be wondering about her background, and you deserve to know." The parents straightened, a few eyebrows raised. Mr. Gilmore continued, his voice steady. "Before becoming a teacher, Miss Reyes spent 5 years working as a trauma response coordinator for child refugees in the Middle East. She speaks 4 languages, including Arabic and Spanish. She's worked in emergency shelters, taught in mobile classrooms during conflict zones, and..." The room went completely still. "She returned to the U.S. after losing her younger brother to a school shooting in El Paso," he added quietly. "She changed careers after that, chose to be here." Every eye turned back to Lillian. Her hands were folded in front of her now. She wasn't smiling, just standing calmly, her presence no longer timid but grounded. "I don't share my story with students," she said softly. "But I do bring everything I've learned into this classroom. Every child matters, every voice counts." The silence lingered long enough for someone to clear their throat awkwardly. Then a mother near the front lowered her eyes and slowly raised her hand. "My daughter, she's been quiet since the school year started, but last week she came home and said she felt safe in class for the first time." "That was your doing, wasn't it?" Lillian nodded once. Outside the room, the last sunlight faded behind the school's brick facade. The hallway noise softened as other classrooms wound down. Inside room 104, something was shifting. Respect was beginning to take root, but trust would take longer, and The following morning, the sun was already hot by 8 a.m., burning through the haze above the Maple Creek Elementary playground. A few kids kicked a soccer ball across the concrete, while others filed into the building, dragging backpacks behind them. Inside room 104, the air conditioning hummed softly as Miss Reyes reviewed a few notes before her first class. She wasn't thinking about last night, not directly. But the silence, the glances, the principal's words, it all lingered in the air like a scent she couldn't quite wash off. Her students began arriving in 2s and 3s, their voices louder than the adults from the night before. Lillian smiled as Jamal bounded in, already telling a story about something his dog did. May followed behind him, clinging to a sketchbook. "Morning, everyone," Lillian greeted as always. "Let's settle in." But as the class got underway, Lillian noticed something different. A boy named Lucas, usually talkative, confident, was uncharacteristically quiet. He stared out the window, didn't raise his hand once, and barely touched his pencil. After class, Lillian approached his desk gently. "Lucas, everything okay?" He shrugged. "I'm fine." She crouched to his level. "You sure? You don't seem like yourself today." Lucas hesitated, then muttered, "My dad said you don't know what you're doing." Lillian blinked. She kept her tone soft. "Do you think that?" Lucas looked down. "I don't know." She nodded slowly. "That's fair. I'd like the chance to prove myself to you. Deal?" He nodded once, then gathered his things and walked out. Alone in the classroom, Lillian sat back at her desk. She didn't take it personally, not really. But it stung because the judgment wasn't just about her. It was about whether someone like her, young, Latina, and not from Houston, had the right to be shaping these kids' lives. Later that day, in the teacher's lounge, Lillian overheard fragments of conversation as she passed by the microwave. A second-grade teacher was speaking in a low voice to another staff member. "I mean, trauma work is admirable, but it's not the same as running a classroom. She's in over her head. I heard she doesn't even use a behavior chart. She won't last the semester." Lillian didn't stop walking, but she felt every word like a tiny cut. At her desk, she opened her email to find two parent messages, both questioning her grading policy. One asked for a meeting, the other suggested switching their child to a different class. That night, she sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by stacks of ungraded journals, a leftover salad, and a sense of growing isolation. Her apartment was small, quiet. On the wall above her desk was a framed photo of her brother, Daniel, taken the summer before he died. He had a grin that reached his eyes. She used to have that too. She opened a journal from one of her students. It was May's. The entry read, "Today we talked about telling true stories. I wrote about my grandma in Guangzhou. Miss Ray said our stories are like seeds. I never thought about mine growing before." Lillian closed the notebook carefully. That sentence, it mattered. The next morning, she made a decision. During her planning period, she sent an email to Mr. Gilmore requesting something bold, a classroom open-door event, not a standard school night. Not another PowerPoint. An invitation for parents to be in the room, to see, to witness the kind of learning that didn't fit into neat categories. An hour later, he replied, "Are you sure you're ready for this?" She stared at the screen for a moment, then typed back, "I have to be." By Friday morning, the flyers were printed and tucked into every fifth grader's backpack. "Experience the learning, Room 104 Open Classroom Event, Tuesday at 9 a.m. A simple invitation. No speeches, no performances. Just parents quietly sitting in, watching real lessons unfold. Lillian knew it was risky. In most schools, parents didn't walk into active classrooms. There were too many ways to be misunderstood. Too many chances for things to go wrong. But she also knew that the kind of trust she needed, real trust, had to be earned in plain sight. The weekend passed quietly. Lillian spent it rehearsing in her mind how things might unfold. She prepared flexible activities, checked every detail in her lesson plans, even practiced her transitions. She wasn't trying to impress anyone, she was trying to let them see. When Tuesday arrived, Houston's sky was a pale, overcast gray. Light rain had begun to fall, tapping softly on the windows as parents filtered in. Room 104 had been rearranged. Extra chairs along the walls, student work displayed proudly, a schedule posted on the board with simple goals. At 9:03 a.m., the first parent entered. It was Mrs. Thompson, Lucas's mother. She didn't smile but nodded stiffly as she took a seat near the door. A few others followed, quiet, watching. Lillian greeted the class warmly, just like any other day. Today we're exploring perspective in storytelling, how different people see the same event in different ways. She held up a photo of a street scene in downtown Houston. A man walking in the rain, a child looking at him from across the road. She gave no context. "I want each of you to write what you think is happening, from the point of view of the man or the child, you choose." The students leaned in, intrigued. Even Lucas raised his head. As they began to write, Lillian circled the room, gently encouraging, asking questions, pointing out moments of strong imagery or emotion. Her tone was calm, deliberate, warm. The parents watched, some leaned forward, others glanced at each other. Then Lillian invited a few students to share their writing. Jamal stood up first. "The man is rushing to get medicine for his mom. He's scared the pharmacy will close." May followed. "The child watches because he thinks the man looks like his dad who left. He wonders if he'll say hi." Lillian nodded thoughtfully. "Do you see how we all carry invisible stories? That's the heart of perspective. It's what makes writing human." There was a silence, not awkward but thoughtful. After the lesson, Lillian invited questions. A few parents stayed quiet, but then one mother, Miss Diaz, who had said nothing at school night, raised her hand. "I work in an ER," she said slowly. "We always talk about staying calm in chaos. That's what you're doing here." "It's rare," Lillian smiled softly. "I try." As the parents began to file out, Lillian caught Lucas's mother at the door. "He talks about you at home," she said. "He doesn't say much, but I've noticed." Lillian paused. "He's thoughtful, insightful. I see it, even when he's quiet." Mrs. Thompson didn't smile, but she nodded slightly less stiffly this time and left. When the room was empty again, Lillian sat for a moment in the quiet. Her students buzzed around her, organizing papers, chatting, unaware of the shift that had just occurred. But Lillian felt it. Trust doesn't arrive all at once. It moves slowly, like rain soaking into dry ground. And for the first time, she believed they were starting to see her. 3 weeks had passed since the open classroom event, and subtle shifts had begun to ripple through room 104 and beyond. Emails from parents, once critical or passive, now arrived with curiosity or gratitude. My son came home talking about voice and tone in writing. Can you recommend books he might like? Thank you for helping my daughter feel heard. Small acknowledgements, no dramatic praise, but real. Even the faculty had started to change its posture. At a staff meeting, the veteran teacher Mrs. Havorson, who once referred to Lillian as the social worker in disguise, approached her with a clipboard. I heard you're teaching argument structure through newspaper editorials. Can I sit in next week? I'm rethinking some of my methods. Lillian blinked but nodded. Of course, anytime. Still, not everything was smooth. On a windy Thursday afternoon, as rain clouds rolled in over Houston, Lillian was called to a meeting with the assistant principal, Mrs. Kendrick. The tone was formal, the kind of tone that made teachers sit up straighter even before a word was spoken. Lillian walked into the office, sat across from Kendrick, and waited. There's been a concern raised, Kendrick said, fingers steepled, by Mr. Bradshaw, Lucas's father. Lillian's shoulders tightened. He attended school night briefly and, from what I understand, missed the open classroom session, but he's expressed that your lessons are too emotion-based. He wants more traditional structure, worksheets, memorization. Weekly spelling tests. Lillian nodded slowly. I'm aligning with the district standards and I post learning targets every day. I know, Kendrick replied. This isn't a warning, just navigate carefully. He's well connected. He's pushing for a classroom transfer. Lillian sat in silence. Part of her wanted to defend her methods, part of her wanted to walk out, but she stayed still, then asked quietly, what does Lucas want? Kendrick hesitated. He hasn't said. Later that day, Lillian pulled Lucas aside during recess. The other kids were outside playing under heavy clouds, and they sat near the windows, just the two of them. Lucas, I want to ask you something. Do you want to stay in this class? He looked at her, no sarcasm, no defense, just honesty. I don't want to leave. I like writing now, but my dad doesn't get it. He thinks we should be doing tests all the time. What do you think? Lucas picked at a thread on his sleeve. I used to think I wasn't smart, but when we wrote about people we miss, I wrote about my grandpa. And I didn't feel stupid anymore. Lillian didn't speak. She just placed a small, folded note in his hand. Give this to your father, she said gently. He deserves to hear from me directly. That night she wrote the letter carefully by hand. No defensiveness, no superiority, just her values, her approach, and her belief in Lucas. The next morning, Lucas came in quietly. The note was gone. That afternoon, an email arrived in Lillian's inbox. Subject, Ray Lucas, from David Bradshaw. Miss Reyes, I read your note. I didn't know my son still thought about his grandfather that much. Maybe I've underestimated what this class is doing for him. Let's talk. David Bradshaw. Lillian sat back in her chair. No, October brought cooler winds to Houston. The trees around Maple Creek Elementary had begun shedding their leaves early, carpeting the sidewalks in shades of yellow and brown. Inside room 104, the rhythm of the year had settled in, but Lillian Reyes remained alert, aware that in schools, comfort can sometimes be mistaken for complacency. She had started rotating student-led conferences. One by one, her fifth graders sat beside their parents and walked them through their work, pointing out progress and reflecting on mistakes. May proudly read a poem she had written in English and Mandarin. Jamal showed his annotated drawings of historical figures. Even Lucas stood with his shoulders straighter now. His father showed up, sat through it, said little but listened. Lillian watched these interactions carefully. She believed that growth was strongest when it was seen, when the adults closest to the child witnessed their effort with their own eyes. Still, she wasn't prepared for what happened next. It started with a staff-wide email from the district, an announcement about the introduction of a new data-driven pilot program focused on standardized assessment benchmarks. Teachers would be expected to align weekly instruction more closely to test metrics, reading levels, math fluency, measurable outcomes. The language was polished and vague, but the meaning was clear. Less freedom, less heart. More control. By the following week, every teacher was required to submit weekly testing projections and intervention plans. Some colleagues were quiet about it, others resigned, but Lillian felt something else. A tightness in her chest, not fear, conviction. She scheduled a meeting with Principal Gilmore. He greeted her with that same calm he always carried, leaning back in his chair, fingers tented. You disagree with the directive, he said simply. Lillian nodded. I understand accountability, but this isn't that. This narrows the definition of learning. It sidelines the emotional growth we've worked so hard to foster. And worst of all, it tells the kids they're only as valuable as their scores. Gilmore listened, then said, You know you're not the only one who thinks this way. Then why is no one speaking up? He exhaled. Because they're tired and scared, and because sometimes leadership takes time to catch up to courage. Lillian sat in silence, then said, I'd like to write a letter, a professional response, a real one, not to attack but to advocate. Can I? Gilmore studied her for a moment, then quietly, yes, but understand it'll come with consequences, not all of them visible. She nodded. I understand. That weekend, Lillian poured everything into the letter. Not just policy arguments, but examples, May's growing voice through poetry, Lucas's shift from silence to self-expression, the way students were learning to think, not just perform. She quoted research. She anchored it in results, but more importantly, she told the truth. She sent it Monday morning. By Friday, the letter had circulated. It wasn't viral, but it reached inboxes that mattered. A few parents forwarded it with support. A few teachers thanked her in whispered tones. One even called her naively brave. That night, Gilmore called her into his office. Central admin isn't thrilled, he admitted. But they're listening. They've agreed to revise the rollout, give teachers more flexibility in how we show growth. He looked at her carefully. You did that. Lillian said nothing at first. Then, it wasn't just me, it was the kids. The final weeks of the semester arrived with early sunsets and the scent of winter break creeping into every hallway. The students in room 104 were restless in that specific way only December could bring. Tired, chatty, but strangely attached to routines they once resisted. Lillian Reyes could feel it too, that strange mix of exhaustion and fulfillment. The semester had tested every piece of her. Her patience, her beliefs, her ability to stand alone in a room full of doubt. But now, walking into her classroom each morning, she no longer felt like a guest. She belonged. On the last Wednesday before break, Principal Gilmore entered her classroom during second period. No announcement, no clipboard, just quiet observation. He watched as May and Jamal debated the tone of a historical speech, how Lucas confidently helped a classmate edit a personal narrative, how Lillian moved from group to group, not commanding, not controlling, but guiding. The room buzzed with energy, but also care. When the bell rang, Gilmore waited until the students had cleared out. I've seen a lot of classrooms in my years, he said. Most work well enough, some run like machines, but this room breathes. Lillian smiled, eyes tired but clear. It hasn't been easy. No, but the best work never is. She hesitated, then asked, have you ever had a teacher who changed you? Gilmore nodded slowly. 5th grade, Mr. Evans. He didn't raise his voice. He just saw who I was before I knew it myself. He looked around the room. That's what you're doing here. That evening, as the final parent-teacher meetings wrapped up, Lillian noticed someone standing in the hallway. Lucas's father. He stepped inside slowly, holding a manila folder. He asked me to give you this, he said, handing it over. He said not to read it until after the break. Lillian took the folder. Thank you for staying involved. It's made a difference. Bradshaw shifted awkwardly. You know, I've worked in oil and gas operations my whole life. Things are measured in output, numbers, efficiency. I was wrong to think that's what education should be. He paused. You've taught him more than writing. You've given him back his voice. After he left, Lillian sat alone in the empty classroom, watching the rain streak down the windows. She didn't open the folder, not yet. She would wait. Outside, the school emptied, the parking lot darkening under gray skies. Before she turned off the lights, she walked to the back wall where the students had posted their one-word resolutions for the new year. Each name written beside a single word. Jamal, believe, May speak. Lucas, rise. Lillian stood for a moment, then picked up a marker. She wrote hers quietly at the bottom of the board. Lillian, stay. Because now, for the first time in years, she knew she didn't need to run toward chaos to matter. She didn't need to prove her worth through pain or loss. Here, in this small, ordinary classroom, was a place to build something that lasted. She turned off enjoyed the story, then hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep bringing powerful, real-life inspired stories like this one. Drop a comment, what would you have done in his shoes? And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an episode.